welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Eric Deepen, and I'm pastor of the Village Church. And across from me is somebody who, I guess before this podcast, I would say was a friend, but I hadn't necessarily gotten to know well.
True.
But I feel like I've gotten to know you pretty well, and even so much so that you kind of make fun of my quirks. So that's Andy, and not Andy Stanley, but Andy Littleton from Mission Church.
Yep.
Yep,
you may have heard of us, and if you have, you're one of 10, and that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Good for you. But hey, we're really thrilled that you, those of you who listen. Thanks for tuning in and carrying what we have to say. I've heard that people from your church like hearing a little more of the raw Eric.
Yes.
And so that's, I'm glad we get to, I think this is a nice venue for us as pastors to get to just talk and have people sit with us. It's a little different than being at church, and it's nice. So I enjoyed our conversation today.
Yeah.
It's a thick one, a long one. We kind of, I hope your questions got addressed, sort of. But we're jumping into, there was an article about progressive Christians and atheism and the things they have in common and why progressive Christians often end up atheists, and we're discussing out of that article. So hang on tight.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes so you can read it yourself.
There you go.
Are we on?
Eric.
Hey, it's good to see you.
This is Faith Over Breakfast. It's Tuesday. We always record these on a Tuesday, though we share them on another day. And we're at our little podcast studio.
We are. We're in there. We should call it like other podcasts do, like our opulent podcast studio.
And it's a little opulent.
That lamp is opulent.
You like that
You
lamp?
need a picture of that for our...
Okay.
Yeah,
we'll get
it's
it.
opulent at least.
It was the most interesting light I could find on Craigslist that was not expensive at all.
You're like a real Craigslister.
A real one. Yeah.
I do not do any Craigslist. I've never bought anything on Craigslist, nor have I sold anything on Craigslist.
Oh.
I have sold one thing on eBay and purchased 2 or 3 things on eBay, but that's the extent of my
Wow.
non-traditional purchasing.
Wow. This is where we're different. I knew there was...
There's a few things.
There's a few things. This is just one of them.
This is just one.
But we're in here. So we've got these great microphones that I forgot to bring cables for. So
Right.
we're still using the little blue snowball, which is fine. But hey, it's cool to be in a space that feels like a recording space. So it's not perfect, but it'll work.
Right. You don't have to wear a head mic anymore.
I'm not wearing
You
that
hated that.
I did.
Even though we had some good recordings from it.
Yeah.
A few that weren't because you wouldn't wear it. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I got to shame you publicly at least.
Yeah. Well, everybody cares.
Yeah, all 10 of our listeners.
All 10 of our listeners are deeply...
But they're avid listeners. These 10 are loyal, and, there's 10 of them, and if they were to give 10%, we could do this professionally.
You just went there.
I just went there. It only takes 10.
Typical.
So there's 20, and I could have full-time job podcasting if they really wanted to really hear us speak. And we could give them more podcasts, every day.
No. I'm not doing that.
I mean, if they're going to pay you $30,000 for a podcast every day.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah, I figured. I knew there was a number.
That number wasn't that high either.
No, was it? So how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm all right. Met with somebody. You're not my first meeting today. Sometimes you are. Often you are. But today you're my second. And so I feel all warmed up for
conversation. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so, I'm good. How about you?
Not great.
No.
I'm in a lot of pain.
Oh, what's up?
I did something to my back, woke up on Monday morning. Well, I felt it going on Sunday.
Really?
And it is, just sciatic kind of things, just all the way down my legs. And so I've been on my back all yesterday.
Okay.
And a little drugged.
Yeah.
And today I'm...
So it's going to be a good podcast.
I'm just on oxycodone. It's not like a big deal.
Right.
Just to try to take a little the edge off. And I've been doing tons of stretching and icing and heat. And here I am. So I don't know. You might have to pick me up out of this seat.
Oh, okay.
Or I may stretch on your rug here at the end of the podcast to kind of loosen things up. But,
well, I'll pick you up.
thank you. That's what we're here for.
That's what we're here
You're here
for.
for me. It's good.
I was trying to pull up this. You sent me an article.
I did.
What, from your back? I take it.
Yeah. Well, I was actually cozy and sitting somewhere.
Yeah. Let's see. But since you texted it to me.
Yeah, well, it's from your favorite website,
My favorite.
the Gospel Coalition.
Yeah.
Those are your peeps.
I like the Gospel Coalition.
I mean, if I had to theologically place you somewhere, I would place you amongst them.
Yeah, I think I've done that.
More than placing you amongst the Presbyterians or
Except some of them are in there too.
Yeah, but they're a little bit more broad than they allow the non-infant baptizers to join and be part.
What's this? The Gospel Coalition?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to baptize the infant.
Oh, you're saying so you wouldn't put me in the Presbyterian specific.
Theologically, you have some.
Yeah. So you're trying to relate to me. So you're reading the Gospel Coalition.
No, I thought it was an interesting article.
Yeah.
You could give them the title of the article.
Well, all of a sudden I can't find it. Hold on. Let me pull it up on my phone. So, 3 beliefs some progressive Christians and atheists share. So when I got this from you, I was like, is this, knowing Eric Siepen here, I'm like, this is going to be one where there's a chance that Eric's like, oh, this is just really good and really interesting, or you're taking issue with it. So
right.
Which one is it?
I think it's a little of both.
Of course. Yeah, sure.
Well, I think that the concept in there is that there's a couple ideas that atheists and progressives hold. One is about the Bible, that it's not a historically accurate, inspired, and divine book. Both atheists and progressives tend to hold that at some degree. Right. It's one of them. But a lot of what the article does is document some more popular individuals and their progression out of progressive Christianity. Well, from fundamental evangelicalism to progressive Christianity to atheism, like Gungor.
Yeah.
And
Bart Campolo. Especially in, what's her name?
Evans. Rachel Held
Evans.
Yes.
Sure.
Some of those. But I think what more importantly to me, and I wish that she had kind of talked, the writer of the article talked more about just how we interact as, I guess we are stuck in the evangelical world, you and I, like as evangelicals in a broad sense. How do we address these and answer some of the questions that she was bringing up or talking about in regards to the struggles that people have with Christianity and with... Because I think the questions that Gungor was asking, the questions that these people are asking are questions that people in your church are asking, people in my church. Absolutely. And if we're doing a good job of helping them through those, if they're not asking them, the world certainly is asking them.
Sure. Let me try to give a little context to our listeners for this article. So there are 2 stories that seem to be key ones, and there are videos included in the article. The first is, Bart Campolo is the son of Tony Campolo, who is a pretty famous evangelical leader, but I would say he was he would never have been put in just your typical right-wing fundamentalist space. He's
probably definitely.
Tony Campolo was much more prone to social action and stuff.
Yeah, and may even be a little progressive.
Sure. Oh, a lot of people would say he is. So, and I'm not taking any issue with that. I'm just saying it's not like or this story is coming out of whoa, the crazy mainline Protestants, but his son did ministry with him and has now become a specifically humanist minister, which is interesting. So he is practicing ministry as a humanist. And there's a movie coming out, so there's a clip from the movie in which he and his dad are processing their differences together, so I'm actually really interested in seeing how that plays out as they talk. Then the other one is Gungor, Michael and Lisa Gungor. And so there's a video where Lisa Gungor, and so these are the folks behind the Liturgist podcast and the band Gungor. Right. And she's sharing her journey, their journey out of Christianity. And what really struck me, about their story too, just especially from hearing this, and I actually have listened to some of the Liturgists podcasts, and I kept thinking to myself when I would listen to podcasts, like, you guys you didn't just come from fundamentalism, you came from an interesting brand of fundamentalism.
Sure. Yeah.
And in her video, she's saying she came into the Christian church with her mother into a very sort of like hyper charismatic thing that she liked, she said. And then immediately, basically, she met her husband, who she called kind of a super Christian. And at a very young age, they were leading at a mega church.
Right.
They had musical talent, and they were platformed, touring the world. Here, I'll just lean toward, you're going to lean in, I'll lean toward you.
Well, you just have
my mic.
The mic, look the space. You're quieter than me.
Yeah.
You speak quieter.
Okay. But I don't know. I guess what I walked away from is I thought, there's the theology here, and I think the article here points out the beliefs, right?
Right.
But what it didn't talk about so much was their story. That's what stuck out to me, is these people's very specific story is what intrigues me more than maybe the specific thing.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
right.
Anywho, she points out a difference. Like, Lisa Gungor saw some stuff about pain and suffering, and the church and the story she'd come from was that God was supposed to take all that away. And the dealing with pain and suffering in her own life and seeing the concentration camps when they were on a tour kind of messed up her view. And the author here contrasted that with C.S. Lewis, who came out of atheism,
right?
Almost because of the fact that pain and suffering pointed to the fact that things aren't the way they're supposed to be. And so he concluded from seeing similar things that you needed a God. But I don't think he was instructed in the Catholic or Anglican churches. He was influenced by that God was going to fix everything in the here and now,
right? Where
the Gungors were.
Right. Well, and his question was, how do I know what is good? He began to wrestle with, the only way that he could possibly identify evil was with the fact that he knew what was, good existed. And so that began that journey for him. I just thought it was interesting, and what I was hoping we could discuss, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on, is that there are some definite questions that I think we have to look at answering differently than we used to. For instance, the problem of evil, and how it was answered for me when I was a kid in church, and it's not that the answer, particularly when it comes to a truth, is different, but how we talk about it, how we discuss the problem of evil, how we discuss the historicity of the Bible, what inspiration means, what authority means.
Sure.
And then also, I think the third one that I think is really kind of prominent is that we no longer, when Paul is talking about, basically perverse sexuality within the Roman Empire, he is not talking about what you and I are talking about, which is actually monogamous marriages between men and monogamous marriages between women.
Right.
And in the sense of, so this culturally, at least in the way that we talk about things, and how we help people wrestle with things, understand God's truth about marriage. I think it has to change. And I also think in fundamentalism that there is some untruths in the way that we've talked about marriage and the way that we've talked about sexuality, the way we talked about evil, and the way, we've talked about the Bible even, that we need to kind of dig up and reprocess and help people understand and wrestle with and kind of come to the truth of who Jesus is and what the gospel really is.
Yeah. I mean, I also want to say that just even from this story right here, like the terms evangelical and fundamentalism are very unhelpful.
Yes, I would agree.
Because even like the Campolos and the Gungers are coming from very different church backgrounds than you and I. And so to just label it all under one banner is,
right.
I don't think that helps anyone make sense of it all.
No, I don't. I think, the idea in this is that there's going to be this, at least kind of what Bart Campo's prediction is, that there's going to be this sort of exodus from people who are younger people are moving from kind of whatever, this Christianity that's more orthodox to a progressive Christianity to atheism, that we're going to see this movement.
I agree with him on that 100%. And I actually, I mean, maybe you don't, but I think he's right that we will see that. And so therefore that you're right that we need to talk about things in different ways. But there was one point where he said in either the video or the article that a lot of the folks operating under the term progressive Christianity, he was saying they have left Christianity. The core tenets that make it what it is are no longer there. And so they're kind of grasping, holding on to something for tradition's sake that feels comfortable. And I think he is too, in a way. I mean, why is he a minister?
Right, I agree.
Why do you stay? Why do you do that? Like it. I mean, even in the article, it said he was using the methodologies he learned in church to promote humanism, right?
Right.
But I mean, I do think he's correct. I mean, I've often thought to myself, if I were to, I don't know why I'd mess around with being a Christian, because I know folks or have seen folks or churches that have abandoned, like they're okay. So Jesus isn't, Jesus is one of the ways to God, and
right.
And nothing is inspired at all. And I'm like, if I were there, why bother? Like, I don't know personally. I mean, I think there's something about religion that we all like, and so I guess that explains some of it. But I'm like, I don't know that I'd be subjecting myself to any kind of disciplines, or if I didn't think that this was like the way to love God because of what he'd done in Christ. Like outside of that, it's hard for me to imagine bothering with any of it. And I think I've seen people who did kind of stick in some form of church and then eventually just kind of were like,
right.
Why?
Well, I feel like because I've sort of lived in the progressive world and kind of went down that road a little bit, I feel like there are two kinds of progressives. There are the progressives who refuse to give up the resurrection, and then there's the progressives who have gone past the resurrection. And that stream of progressivism, like, I can't even talk with. Like, their hermeneutic and how they understand Scripture is completely devoid of anything I would have to talk to them about. Whereas the ones who at least are willing to say, yes, like, I'm kind of wrestling or giving up big chunks of things, but I refuse to give up, like, Christ, his divinity, and the resurrection. Like, maybe giving up the virgin birth, they're going to give up, the Old Testament as actually being, God, or, those kinds of things. At least there's some place to talk to them about things, not necessarily.
It's hard.
It's hard, but it's not. So those are sort of the two streams in progressive Christianity that I see.
And the idea of Christianity progressing toward what? What is the progress toward? From what toward what?
Yeah, well, I think if you really got down to it with a progressive Christian, it's just a kinder, gentler, more Jesus-like Christianity is what they're arguing for.
But, okay.
I mean, I'm not going to, I have nothing to defend. I think that's what they don't think that what they would call, I know we have to use these labels, like what they would call fundamental Christianity is not what Jesus envisioned. It's not loving your neighbor.
Sure.
It's not caring for the poor and the sick and the downtrodden. It's not engaging people.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess my assumption that I have about humans and all churches is that none of them are ever perfectly doing what Jesus envisioned.
Right. I think they'd argue that it's in the theology itself.
Yeah, but then interestingly,
'Cause
what maybe this article is pointing to is that the result of some of the progressive stuff is that you could very easily be charged with having also abandoned pretty key things. That
I totally.
Yeah,
I agree with that. I guess we could talk about our, progressive brothers and sisters. But I'm just curious about actually talking about the questions that were really posed there.
All right, let's do that.
I mean, because I think maybe you and I have some interesting ways of handling it because, we both would say we're pretty in the middle of orthodoxy, but we look at the world kind of open-handedly in method and are willing to be creative about how we help people think about things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would say, and we've said at our church, that we have there's no sense that we are some kind of new Christianity. We're not, we consider that we are, our hope is to be placing our hope squarely in the faith that has always united Christians over the centuries. But then the question is just how does that get shared today? So there are methodological questions that stand outside of the faith.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how I tend to think about it is, I have no desire to be a new kind of Christian. My hope would be, and I expect to
be an ancient kind of Christian.
But I'd like to share faith with the other Christians of churches that I don't completely understand even today. But I don't desire to find a new savior.
Right.
I would hope the same would be of the, of ancient churches, not a new savior.
Right, and I guess for me, when I think through all of those things, the best way for me to think about it, which is probably not the greatest way, is to think about it as hamburger joints. And I do imagine that, if you think about Orthodox Christianity as Burger King and McDonald's, there are these systems, and they produce hamburgers, and they're great. But you go to a place, maybe locally, like Diablo Burger, or you go over to Gray's Burger, and you have one of those. There's actually a cost to it, but it actually is, why go have McDonald's after you've had one of those? There's not, for me at least. I know you're going to destroy my argument, but there's something different in it. And so I would argue that, at least for me as a follower of Jesus, I want to be in a place where people are like, yeah, this tastes different. I need to think about what's being offered here and what I'm being invited into.
And an interesting parallel to all that is the question is, what is that taste and why do I like it?
Right.
So sometimes I like Diablo Burger and Gray's because they make me feel more righteous. They do, because I'm buying ethically made food instead of that other unethical stuff. And the weird thing is, being in an industry where I help build out restaurants, some of the ethics behind some of the ethical places are less ethical than we'd like to think.
Oh, of course.
So what the pull is to get you to come spend money in their place is to make you feel like a better person.
True. True.
So it's in our Christianity, does does this new thing is the thing that I like about it that it makes me feel like a better person? Because that actually may feed right into the very thing that has broken us apart as humans forever, thinking that we can be moral, that our version of morality is better than somebody else's,
Sure.
that we have moral high ground.
Sure. When you find something good and you experience it as good, you can certainly, and other people are offering the same thing, you can certainly become arrogant because you can feel like you
Right.
found something. But I don't think
I do like Grey's and Diablo.
I don't think that negates the fact that they may be offering something very different and engaging in a very different way.
Well, I do think it's a good question to ask, because sometimes, I mean, you can get into the same thing for the wrong reasons, right? Like something could taste better because it is more like there is more authenticity, and there is more, and it's more, perhaps more centered on the gospel and more rooted in Christ, and that's a good, and that does feel good, and there's a reason for that, and it's a good reason because it honors God, and it takes your personal goal of righteousness out of the equation, which is quite
Sure.
the relief. And so the fact that it is a good feeling doesn't mean it's not good. But I think it's a good question to ask. Why do I feel good about this? Is it because it's stroking my ego?
Sure. I mean, what you would hope, we can get into this analogy, but you at least have in let's say the Gray's model or whatever, you have a deconstruction built in. In McDonald's, you're not deconstructing anything. In Burger King,
they once did.
Yeah, but you have a system, right? And a system that's productive for you, and you maybe have lost sight of people, whatever. I mean, so I do think, like it or not, Mission Church is a Gray's of the churches.
Sure.
The Village is a Diablo Burger of the churches.
It's some new iteration. Yeah.
Right. Where something different, and and people, even people, so here's an example, we have a pastors group here.
Yeah.
There's a pastor here, number of pastors have bigger churches than you.
Oh, sure.
But when they show up here, they're kind of like little kids in the candy store. I watched them. They're looking at the drums. They're looking at the cool walls. They're looking at, right? Because it's something, there's something about the artistic part of it that captures something of their heart. It's different than what they're leading or experiencing. All that to say, maybe you and I, we're going around our elbow to get to the point of, maybe we have something to say when we talk about the Bible and people begin to wrestle with its authority. When they begin to wrestle with it, what it means for it to be inspired, how you might handle what people who don't necessarily study Scripture very much, but experience the New Testament and Old Testament God as different in their mind. Somehow this is a different God. And so how do we help people think that through? How do we think sexuality through differently, where we're not just saying, this is what it says, get on board, or go somewhere else.
Yeah, and because this article, it identified 3 things, which are kind of just hot button things, like that, the progressives and the atheists are going to have kind of an open view on sexuality. They're going to view Scripture as not having any, validity or authority. It's more just something that could inspire you, potentially. What was the third?
So we got Scripture, and we have sexuality. And I don't remember what the third one was. Is it the existence of God at all?
I don't remember. Yeah. I mean, I think the sexuality one is actually just a byproduct of the others. I mean, I think there's a whole host of issues that if you're saying, what the Bible says about how we ought to live in relation to God and each other, if the Bible is not authoritative on that, I mean, I think that would directly impact how we would view all sorts of social issues, including ones that a lot of progressives would really like to uphold. But I think I mean, if there is no normative text for humanity as a whole, then the truth is there isn't any reason anybody should abide by anything at all.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah. I mean, and to take, and philosophers, philosophers who are thinking this through know that any moral high ground stuff is, you have no right.
Right.
Yeah. And you got to. It's then it just becomes pragmatic.
Without an external authority, you have no right to say anything. Right.
You can say this is probably better for our race, and the question is, how much does that matter?
Right. Well, yeah. It becomes a selfish thing.
It does.
Protecting my interests and my comforts it's just a worship of self that we get down to.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious, so if somebody's like, hey, I'm reading through the Old Testament, and I've got a number of people in my church who are doing this for the first time in their life, and some of them who've been in the church for a long time, and they're starting to really read it in detail, really think about the events of Genesis through the prophets, and they're going, whoa, what's going on here? Know, and they're wrestling through Levitical law, and they're like, and they're having a hard time.
Sure.
Reconciling, what they've been taught sort of in the Sunday school, given the Sunday school Jesus and sort of in some ways, what I would argue a cheap grace, seeker sensitive kind of discipleship all their life. Yeah. Or kind of a strong fundamentalism that's just kind of rule. Yeah. They're trying to reconcile all of this, and it's not making sense to them. Yeah. They're having a hard time, maybe in the minutia. Less in the bigger story. And it's what is God doing right here? Why is he doing this? This doesn't seem to line up with what I know about God. Right. How do you kind of begin to talk through things like that with people?
I don't have this great plan.
Of course you don't. But
we spent the last year in the Pentateuch, and I think we didn't shy away from some really hard and confusing ideas that were there, but we continually showed that, and it was easy to show that this is exactly what the New Testament is saying, and fleshing out the fact that there are judgments at the hand of God, and that's so hard to stomach, right? But that's precisely what Jesus is saying. That he didn't. He spoke of it more than anyone in the Bible, especially the concept of hell itself. And so now we get the fighter jet coming over us, speaking of judgment.
Yeah, this may be
ominous sound in the background.
Maybe the harder part of your podcast studio is you're going to have to schedule events.
There are hours that will be less expensive because of really
the podcast,
because of these jets. If you can live with the jets, you get a better deal. But yeah, Jesus is not coming into this sweet world and fixing it all, right? And he's definitely warning of the wrath to come. And so we're saying look, this Jesus was so adamant about the kingdom of God, and he was so adamant about our need to be reconciled to God, and he was adamant enough to take the judgment of God upon him, squarely upon himself, because it's a thing. Because it, and so he's not disagreeing with the Old Testament. He seems to be agreeing with it. So, and then we did, in our small group, we did Judges, and we worked through, what is Judges but the disintegration of a culture? Where the level of faithfulness to God decreases and decreases and decreases. And so what it's showing us is that we do not keep the law as we should, and we do not, even when you've been given a new land and you've been given the presence of God in a temple. But Judges is pointing to there must be a hope that comes from somewhere else, because it's not coming from us. Right. And so when you read Judges as a morality book, I'm sorry, that's a sad thing, because it doesn't work. No. It doesn't work for them. And so if you're reading it trying to find morals to live by, what you're going to find is morals to fail by. Right. But if you're looking for the God that's going to redeem extremely broken and rebellious and idolatrous people, then you find a beautiful thing in there. So that's...
So how do you kind of deal with the... a question of, Joshua,
Sure.
extreme genocide,
Right.
Of children who are not, what someone would argue are being killed. They're not agents
Sure.
per se, like in the world, and that's just disruptive and hard for people, kind of for the modern mind to adjust to. That God is saying, there are these people who are wicked, and I'm calling you into this land, and you're going to wipe them out.
Sure.
And their animals too.
Right.
That's
right.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't feel like I have this great, like, I get to say, hey, like, look, because these people descended from so and so therefore it's just all fine. I mean, I've heard those kind of explanations.
Right.
But at the same time, I would say, at least say this, like, you got to wrestle with that no matter what you believe. Like, people are doing, there are there's death by disease, there's death by war, there's death by all of this. And so you have a couple of options. If you're going to believe in a God at all, and that God has any form of control at all, then all of this is sort of happening by the hand of that God. And so that is a conundrum, that is a difficulty, that this God, even created a system with a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Like that's just a hard thing.
Sure.
And so I don't want to pretend like just the Joshua narrative is what makes that hard.
No, it's just one that people wrestle with often.
Right. And so then the other question on the flip side of it, so let's say there is no God, and this is just us following our instinct to survive.
Right.
And it doesn't actually mean anything existentially. It doesn't, there's no meaning to it.
Right.
Then it's not a tragedy.
Right.
And so then there's actually no possibility of any justice behind it. There's no possibility of any will or rationale. To me, that's like the fact that God has a will that I do not understand, and the fact that God has a rationale that I do not understand is hard for me.
Right.
But it is less difficult for me than the fact that there is no meaning to any of this.
Right.
And that this is just instinct working its way out, and that we have all this moral frustration that actually is completely off base.
Right.
So to me, we have two major problems here, and I don't understand everything behind how God decides who gets to live and die via war, via disease, I do not.
Right. Well, and I think this is the harder. So, right, this is the harder question they brought up in this article. In the article we read, is the sovereignty of God is what most people begin their process of descending away from.
Well, that was where Bart Campolo.
Yeah, and I think it's when I sit with people in council, like people can come to terms with so many other things and understand where Jesus works, but what they have such a hard time with is in their own suffering and the suffering of people around them. They keep asking, even if they know the quote unquote answer.
Sure.
Why does a good God allow such deep pain and suffering?
Yes.
And I think part of this, and this is where, it was so hard for me to kind of step into the Reformed world, particularly the Calvinist world, is that a simple, like sometimes the understanding of sovereignty is not, and the way it's explained, not necessarily the way it's understood theologically, but the way it's explained is not comforting.
Sure.
And it's not really, because it doesn't really explain God's presence in the midst of all of those things, right, and how my will does have a way of interacting with God's presence and will in all of this suffering. Right. And when we can begin to kind of wrestle with God being in our suffering and God suffering with us, and we can, like you said, place at some level aside this God who created, like I don't understand, from the tree to Joshua to so much of the narrative, even in my own life. But without God and without his presence in the midst of my pain and suffering, there's no meaning. There's no point.
Right.
Like for me, it's like
it really isn't. Yeah.
I do stand with Paul kind of in the New Testament sense of if there's no resurrection, like I should be pitied beyond the worst of society, the most, abused, and because I'm traveling down a road of stupidity. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, like I feel what is new, and maybe not new in the sense of it's not been talked about before, but maybe the younger generation, pastors like you, are trying to bring God's presence into people's suffering, beginning to like try to pull that veil back and really show in a relational sense how God's sovereignty works, not necessarily in some like linear, foundational, like this is just how it is and you got to subscribe to it and you'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Somehow everybody wants to talk to me right now, it seems.
I've had that experience.
Isn't that weird?
Yes. Yeah. This podcast are like, it's Tuesday at 8:30. Let's start
People
calling.
Like, time to call. It's, we've definitely spent a lot of time emphasizing, and in our small group, we did Old Testament, we did Joshua, and we did Proverbs. And the question Judges and Proverbs. And the question I'm always trying to figure out that for a small group, I don't do this whole, like, I've got to study, I'm going to teach you. It's more like we read and I like to hear people process. So I don't come in with this, like, authoritative plan. But the question is always, what is happening here? Like, can we see Jesus in this? How do we understand this through the lens of the fact that God entered into creation? Because that changes how you read the Proverbs. That changes how you read, Joshua. Because if you see yourself in if what you see when you read Joshua is, what the place I'm in relationship to God is, I am a Canaanite, and this is like we're back to the garden now. Like I am. Even in my quest to know why, like we just got into this in our last sermon, like what's the knowledge of good and evil that Adam and Eve want? They want to know why. They don't want to just know. They don't want to just have God say to them, this is the way. Right. They want to know why. And I deeply want to know why. So when I look at that narrative, I'm going, uh-oh, I'm them. And so then if Jesus is right, that when I've been angry at my brother, it's as if I've killed him, that means I'm not Abel, I'm Cain. And then that means I end up being a Canaanite. And that means I end up, I am on the run from God, I'm alienated from God, I don't belong in the land. And so Jesus is what he's doing is he's standing in front of Canaanites like me, taking on the judgment of God. He's the one taking the sword of genocide. He's the one, and who killed him? We did.
Right.
And now I get though, so that then when you start to see it in that, like, this is trying to show me what Jesus is doing. I get that those are still historical events, though. I do, and I'm not saying that makes that easy or fine or anything. But I mean, when you start asking those questions and you go, so those historical events are showing us that we as humans are not good. We're disintegrating our society, just like what happened back then. We really are the pollutant, which is what I think I hear that on National Public Radio over and over again, is that we are killing this world. Sure. And I feel like the Bible is saying that too, and that, like, what we deserve is to be, for the world to be washed clean of us. Another flood would do the world good. But the fact that that's not happening is all because of mercy. And what I struggle with the most is I just wish everyone saw that. I wish everyone, but they don't, and they didn't.
Right.
They never have.
Well, and I think go back to your garden illustration, or it's not just that people want to know why. I mean, the thing that Eve and Adam are tempted by, at least Eve, we know for sure, is that there's a sense that God is holding out. It's not just why, that he also knows something, he's not telling you everything.
That was a layer of, there was more to the sermon, but
yes, there are multiple layers of that.
There's he doesn't have my good, there's something good he's keeping from me.
Sure.
Right? And it looks good to me, and I want it. Right.
Right.
And then I think in Adam, what we went into yesterday was that in Adam you see that to walk with God is chaotic and fearful, and I don't want to enter into that. And then once I've failed, I don't trust that God can heal me.
Sure.
So I must fix this myself.
Sure.
There's all sorts of stuff going on in the garden. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot going on. And when you talk, and you're talking about your kind of way of understanding Scripture, you're talking about a complex understanding of Scripture's authority in your life.
Sure.
And how it can authoritatively work itself into your life, how the Spirit of God uses it. I mean, as you're even, kind of laying out the way that Jesus stands in for us as Canaanites. These are complex ways.
Sure, I get it. Yeah, it's not just you read it cursory and
well, even in just the idea that it's does that really address are we ever going to have a way of satisfactorily answering why a good God allows evil? Well, yes, but it's not going to be a really simple. A good God allows evil because, and then you get,
and by satisfactorily, you mean an answer that just clears it up,
and we all feel good.
And makes every situation make sense.
Right? It's not a fifth grader, 3-word answer. No. A good God allows evil because, and then you get to put your 3 words in and get a check mark on it. That's kind of the frustrating part of what I feel like atheists and progressive Christians present often are these little talking points that they keep beating as a drum that really aren't true, and kind of deny the complexity of humanity itself, and also of a deeper understanding of. What
are a couple of those you've seen?
Well, I think they were in the obviously the one we're talking about, the problem of evil. I think
what's the solution in progressive Christianity? I don't know that I've
for problem of evil
heard one.
Well, first so sovereignty is the first thing that goes. The second thing is atonement, right?
Sure. Because that's the other one she said.
Right, atonement, right? The angry God taking his wrath out on Jesus.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that's really where progressive Christianity has struggled, is to deconstruct probably the most important part of Christianity, the cross itself.
Right. Because if that's just if that's just Jesus being a good example,
right?
I
don't
know.
Well,
then the Iron Giant was a great example, and
there are lots of great examples.
There are lots of great example. Yeah,
he's just following in a long line.
The guy at Safeway that stepped in front of the shooter was doing something as profound as Jesus. What he did was profound. Never argue that.
No.
But was it as profound as what Jesus did? He just was showing us, here's how to love.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not saying he wasn't showing us how to love, but was that all?
Right. No, and so, because the angry God is a big one that the drum keeps getting beat on. Is
but here's the thing. If God's not angry, what business do we have? Why would we want him around? Because every progressive Christian is angry about the concentration camps.
Yeah.
And angry about destroying the environment, and angry about the fact that that the sojourners aren't being cared for and are being rejected, and
Sure.
angry at all the ways that fundamentalists, silence people. So if God doesn't care about any of that,
Right.
I mean, I think they all think God does care about that, which means he's angry.
Yes. But his anger moves to violence, and then he, and that I think that's partly what they struggle with is the violence of the Old Testament, and they also so there's that, and then there's the historical. So I'll tell you to tell you why this article was interesting to me I'll tell you a little story. So I went to Bookman's a couple of weeks ago, looking for a book that I could sit and enjoy over, as we talked earlier in a few podcasts, like my Fallon month. I'm going to find a book to just really enjoy, and I found this book called Zealot.
Yeah.
This was on the #1 bestseller list. And I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. I've heard about it, never read it. I opened in the middle of the book, and I just read a few pages. Extremely compelling. I was like, wow, this is really cool about the life of Jesus, and it's kind of from this, this religious professor who's probably not a Christian. So this is fascinating. I want to read this. So I, picked it up and read the first few chapters, and I was angry because even though you look at the back of his book, and he even, cites N.T. Wright and some other, conservative scholars and things like that, historically, he butchers the Gospels. He butchers I'm not a historian, and I know that what he's saying just isn't true in the way that he's building things out. And I got so angry. But it's this kind of deconstructing Jesus with inside the narrative, making arguments about like what was actually going on in the first century, and
sure,
like basically saying,
and
look,
there have
like
been a lot of these throughout the centuries.
Yes, let's divorce Jesus from really where he's at, even though you're saying you're not, and it's just frustrating. And so, like, I don't know, it's like a watering down of the effectiveness of the gospel and what Jesus is doing and who he is.
Yeah.
I will give the book credit that when it came to the resurrection, he was willing to say that it's a historic conundrum, and any historian has to deal with it and can't say it didn't happen.
Because people did say that it did.
Yeah, and there's enough.
You can't just say no.
Right, there's enough historic markers, but it's still, when it comes to resurrection and history, like, what are you supposed to say? This guy rose from the dead. Like, that's a hard thing for...
Well, the whole it's scientifically impossible thing it used to be very strong, and now it's not, because I think people in the scientific community are starting to acknowledge that the possibility of things isn't as cut and dry as they thought.
Right.
So that changes that. Now you have, if somebody says it happened, you can't just as easily say no, it didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
The only one, at the end, like, that really frustrated me is his argument was, okay, so the Gospels, and including John, so the Synoptics and John, were written so much later that they understood all the arguments that were going to come at Jesus' resurrection, so they just placed all these things into the narrative to say, oh, see, there was a soldier by the tomb. See, like,
So the assumption is that these guys who, for every historian I think would say were actually fishermen, they got out they strategically planned a religious movement so effectively. They became social scientists all of a sudden in the modern sense.
Right.
They went from fishermen to ingenious social scientists.
Extreme academian.
Yeah. And with abilities to persuade people for all of history.
Yeah, it just got frustrating. So some of that, too, is like, I don't know, irritated me a little bit in that process. And so this article, like, it concerns me because of the way people understand information now. Like, you listen to a podcast and you read a blog and you change your life. Yeah,
no, it's wild. I mean, it's weird we're doing a podcast, but can we just say it, like, please don't change your life because of what, like, think and, like,
go research,
read books, and because you can find a podcast that will tell you anything you want, right? And you can find a blog, like, Oh my goodness. Somebody had sent me some on the sexuality question. It was like, here's a video, this guy explaining this. And it's like, well, yeah, but I can send you a video of somebody explaining it another way. It can't, just because there's a video. I mean, I guess it used to be like to make a video, you had to have $1 million and a very, very good idea. You don't anymore.
No.
All you need is your iPhone and a selfie stick.
Right.
And so, yeah, just, oh, man.
So, but in that age, like we can't just say, because in some ways we sound like old fuddy-duddies. We're like, oh my gosh, back in the day, you actually had to do some research to say something important.
And that doesn't mean that you weren't wrong back. I'm just saying it was harder to be platform, and now anybody can be platformed, so you got to be very discerning.
Right. Which brings me, I guess, why I thought this interesting is what brings me back to like what our pastor conversation was about and the video that you sent around about basically churches, to make it really short, churches creating a culture that actually counters the culture.
Right.
That it's so strong that it gives people the capacity to interact with their culture.
Yeah.
And when it pushes against their faith and when it pushes against and into their doubt, like they understand how to speak to it and to live in it and to wrestle with it. And I think maybe at some point we could talk about that even as what it looks like to.
Well, and then, I mean, and I see, we got to wrap this up soon, but I see in the stories and the videos in here, these folks, I mean, Bart Campolo was raised on the preaching circuit in big conference world, right? And the Gungers were, shoved into leadership of a megachurch when they were 20-something. And really, they were out touring, leading everybody and putting their hands in the air, singing. They hadn't been formed.
Right.
They had not been discipled. And so I think that is a huge, I mean, I don't want to say that's all there is to it. They don't have valid thoughts. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm just saying, we got to, the big box, consumer faith thing, it's not working. People need to be known and shaped and invested in. That's something I came away with. I thought, I think these folks, there are layers to why they walked away, and it wasn't all just doctrinal.
Yeah, no.
It's a story.
And maybe what you and I could do is let's have a series of podcasts next year about just what it means to be formed, what it looks like to be discipled, like what a disciple looks like, and just kind of talk through how you would become a follower of Jesus in community and how, what your life might look like, what kind of fruit you might bear in that process.
All right. Well, that's it. Thanks for joining us.
Kicking us out, huh? You're kicking me out.
We're going on an hour here, my friend.
Wow, that's a good podcast.
It's a good one. So, thanks for joining. Hope it was just listening to us talk is of some form of help. The idea of this podcast is we don't plan this, we don't script this. This is two pastors just talking, and there's a couple empty chairs here at the table. You get to pull one up, and so hope you enjoyed.